Hello and welcome to the Retirement and Money Show. So you're getting close to 55 and you're thinking about early retirement, but you're worried about the gap between stopping work and getting your state pension at 66. So let's imagine there's 11 years that you've got to fund somehow between 55 and 66. But there's a brutal truth to all of this, and that is that gap could drain over £130,000 from your pension pot. So in this video, I want to show you what I call the bridge strategy that lets you retire early without destroying your pension savings. First, I'll show you the brutal maths of the retirement gap and why it matters so much. Then I'll explain the hybrid model. And what that does is it combines part-time work with pension drawdown. And if you don't know what drawdown is, we have other videos on this channel that covers that topic specifically. But what we'll also do is we'll cover the traps that catch people out when they try this strategy, and I'll also give you a practical checklist to help you work out your own numbers so you can figure out what strategy is likely to work best for you. And what that means is by the end, you should hopefully know exactly how much you need to earn part-time, and you'll understand how to make your pension pot last decades longer than it might otherwise have gone. Plus, you'll see the specific pitfalls to avoid. So my name's Saki Sain. I've got over 25 years experience of advising on pensions and retirement planning. So let's move on. So let's start with the hard bit, and the bit that people find really difficult to understand and to talk through, and that is the numbers. So if you retire at 55 years, your state pension doesn't start until 66. So that's 11 years with no state pension income. And the full state pension currently pays just under £12,000 a year, going up to £12,500 from April 2026. So what that means is that gap means that you're missing out on over £130,000 of potential state pension if you were to get that during that period. Now, your private pension has to cover all of this shortfall. And again, this is assuming that if you had your state pension, you'd have a sufficient amount of income to live through retirement. But this is where it also gets a little bit worse, because taking £12,000 a year from your pension for 11 years doesn't just cost you £132,000. And that is because you're also losing out on all of the growth that that money would have made. So the real cost is actually closer to about £170,000 or more, depending on the returns that you could have achieved if you hadn't have taken that money out. So the reality is that that's a massive chunk that's gone from your pot before you even hit 66. And most people don't realise this, unfortunately, until it's too late. But in my opinion, I think there's a smarter way to bridge this gap without wrecking your pension. I'm going to cover this in the next slide, because that's called the hybrid model. So this is where the bridge strategy comes into play. So instead of retiring fully at 55, you work part-time until you're 66. And what you do is you top up your reduced salary with small amounts from your pension. So here's how it works in practice. Now I'm going to give you an example, and I will caveat this by saying this is just an example and your circumstances may well be very different. You might need to use the money for different things, and you might want to draw down at different rates. But this hopefully will give you an example of how the strategy works so you can flex it as and how you need. So what you do is at 55, you take 25% tax-free lump sum directly from your pension, and you use that to clear any debts or build up the cash buffer. So for example, if you had a pension pot of £200,000 at 55, you could take 25% tax-free as a lump sum, which would be £50,000, and you might use around £25,000 of that to pay down your debts or reduce your mortgage. And what you then do is you keep the remaining £25,000 as a cash buffer to cover a few years of expenses during the bridge years. So what that then does, it leaves roughly £150,000 still invested to support smaller drawdowns. What you then do is you reduce your hours to maybe 20 to 25 hours per week, and you set up small pension drawdowns to take small regular amounts. So instead of needing £12,000 a year from your pension, you might only need £4,000 a year. And don't forget, you've still got some of your cash buffer from your tax-free cash, which you can dip into as and when you need to limit the amount that you need to take out. And because your part-time work is covering the rest, this should help give you the income that you need. Now, flip side to this is to not take the tax-free cash at all and to only draw down as and when you need. And we have a different video on this within our channel, which you can watch on how to do that. But for this example, we've assumed you're taking the 25% tax-free upfront. So what this strategy does, it saves your pension pot from being hammered. And plus, what you're still doing is you're building up state pension credits because you're working and still building up credits towards your state pension. And you haven't stopped contributing to your pension either. So that will continue to grow with you. But before you rush into this, there are 3 traps that could cause a bit of challenge with this strategy. And I'll cover that on the next slide. So what are these things we need to be careful of? Well, the first one, the first trap is the money purchase annual allowance, or the MPAA. Because once you start taking taxable income from your pension, it's going to kick in. And what did that do? Well, it limits your future pension contributions to just £10,000 a year in total. So that's £10,000 a year between you and your employer. So if you are still working and want to continue saving, you may hit that ceiling, and you may hit it quite fast. Now, some people think that they can just keep contributing like they did before, but if you do go over the £10,000, I'm afraid you will likely face, or not likely, you will face a HMRC tax charge. And the second trap, well, that's called sequence risk, and you may or may not have heard that before. But basically what that is when the stock market crashes right after you start taking money out of your pension pot, or you start drawing it down. So basically what you're doing is you're selling your investments at the worst possible time to fund your income. What happens is that can permanently damage your pension pot, because you're taking money out when the markets are falling, and the reality is it may not recover. And the third trap, well, that is health issues forcing you to start part-time work earlier than you may have planned. Now, these aren't small problems, so you need a specific plan to handle each one. But hopefully what this slide has helped you do is to start thinking through how these might impact you. Right then, so here's your 7-step checklist. So the first thing you need to do is calculate how much income you actually need each year. And what I recommend you do here is be realistic about your bills, your mortgage, or any spending that you've got. Don't guess, have a look at what you've been spending and make a note of it all. Second thing to do is work out what you could earn part-time in your field. Maybe that's £15,000 a year for 3 days a week, but it's good to know. And the third thing to then do is subtract your part-time earnings from your total income need. And basically what that will do is it'll give you how much you need to draw from your pension each year. Fourth thing to do is to check if your employer actually allows flexible working or phased retirement. Some firms support it and some don't. You do need to ask, but certainly my experience with dealing with employers nowadays is that they do want to encourage part-time work and phased retirement, because it allows them to keep your expertise within the business. The fifth thing to do, well, that's to build an emergency cash fund of at least 12 months worth of expenses. And this protects you if you can't work or the markets crash, which means that if the markets are falling, you don't necessarily need to start taking money out of your pension pot. And this, if you think back to the example I gave earlier on, is what some of your tax-free cash can be used for. Sixth, talk to your pension provider about your drawdown options and the impact of the money purchase annual allowance. And number 7, check your state pension forecast at gov.uk and see what you are likely to get in retirement, at state retirement, and whether you're entitled to any credit. So hopefully all that makes sense. This strategy only works if you plan every detail properly. So as we get to the end of the video, just let me quickly recap what we've covered. And that is the gap between 55 and 66 is something that you need to fund. And the example that I used, it could be £170,000 from your pension pot. Now, the numbers will be specific to you, so you will need to work that out. But this is what, the kind of field that those numbers are going to be in. And this bridge strategy that I talked about, well, it lets you work part-time while drawing small amounts from your pension. What this helps you do is helps you protect your pot and keeps you building up credits towards your state pension, because that is really important. So if you didn't know, to get the full state pension, you need to have had 35 years of essentially paying national insurance contributions. So if you do retire at 55, you may not have achieved that, which means you will not get the full state pension. But this strategy allows you to do it. But do remember, if you do follow this strategy or something similar, watch out for the money purchase annual allowance, because that is going to limit your future pension contributions to £10,000. So hopefully this video helped give you a flavour for how the bridge strategy works, basically how you draw down a little bit from your pension and top that up with continuing to work and the benefits that that is going to give you. If you do want to follow the strategy, I think you should sit down, as I said before, create a checklist and work out what your numbers are going to be. So if you did find this video helpful, please do give it a like and subscribe to our channel, where we have lots of content related to planning for retirement. And if you want any more information, you can go to our website, which is financialeducation.co.uk. And the last thing is good luck and goodbye.